Allora, possiamo iniziare. Per prima cosa, benvenuti, grazie a tutti di essere qui. È veramente un piacere oggi avviare questa sessione, che è una continuazione di momenti di discussione che abbiamo costruito appunto sul tema del New Present Circle. Quindi, come tutti sappiamo, stiamo vivendo un periodo nuovo, sta cambiando la dinamica del nostro vivere quotidiano e in particolare abbiamo avviato delle riflessioni sul tema dello spazio e abbiamo coniato questo termine hub quarter e in particolare una frase sintetica da headquarter ad hub quarter. Perché abbiamo in qualche modo costruito questa proposizione? Perché la parola head ovviamente ci fa subito immaginare appunto una centralizzazione, una testa, ma anche un centro fisico e non soltanto dal punto di vista dello spazio, ma anche dei modelli organizzativi, dell'organizzazione del lavoro, dei task, della gerarchia. E la parola hub in maniera molto semplice ci fa pensare appunto a un network, a una rete, a una diffusione, a una liquidità, non soltanto appunto fisica, spaziale, ma anche dal punto di vista organizzativa. E questa ovviamente è una fase molto, molto affascinante. E oggi abbiamo voluto in qualche modo continuare questa riflessione che è partita sulla community degli HR, ma si è estesa anche al corporate estate, la parte digital, e con grande piacere abbiamo appunto chiesto agli ospiti che vedrete che saranno presentati qui con noi di darci degli stimoli e in particolare siamo molto contenti che Maurizio Melis ha accettato di condurre e moderare questa sessione che durerà un'ora e mezza e quindi avrà 3 sessioni e Maurizio sarà qui con noi per alimentare il dibattito e farlo partire. Quindi Maurizio, se puoi iniziare con noi è un grande piacere che iniziamo questa sessione.
Grazie, no, grazie a voi perché mi fa piacere anche a me trovarmi in diciamo, in questo consesso, perché mi sembra di assistere a uno di quei passaggi che in qualche modo erano connaturati in questa anche rivoluzione digitale noi stiamo vivendo queste due transizioni, quella digitale e quella, no, ambientale, lo diciamo spesso. C'è chi parla di twin transition e secondo me ci azzecca, cioè il fatto che spesso questi due cambiamenti in realtà sono inestricabili. Pensate al ruolo dei dati nella gestione dell'energia, della logistica, eccetera, eccetera, e l'impatto sull'ambiente. Però ecco, su questa roba del digitale io ci tengo solo a dire due cose prima di presentarvi gli ospiti. Perché da un po' di tempo, almeno questa è la mia tesi, che il grande valore aggiunto, diciamo, dell'economia digitale sia legato alla possibilità proprio di condividere risorse. Spesso abbiamo considerato l'economia condivisa come un'economia con la E minuscola, lasciatemi dire così, l'economia dei poveri. Invece è il contrario, è l'economia con la E maiuscola perché fa un uso estremamente più efficiente delle risorse. Non doveva essere questo il miracolo, no, del capitale, quello di usare bene le risorse. Beh, insomma, in realtà non le abbiamo usate così tanto bene. Uno dei motivi è che condividere in realtà è complicato. Cioè è facile farlo con lo zio, col fratello, è molto difficile condividere degli asset con degli estranei e trasformare in una economia questa roba qua. Riusciamo a farlo adesso solo perché il digitale ci consente di risolvere un'enorme complessità, sia burocratica sia di matching tra i bisogni. E questo succede anche per l'economia circolare, lo stesso identico fenomeno. Abbiamo tanti rifiuti diversi e dobbiamo trovare il modo di matchare con... Ecco, sta succedendo anche con gli spazi. Ora, la cosa divertente è che quando voi cambiate questi modelli c'è un impatto economico, ambientale. Faccio sempre l'esempio dell'auto. L'auto sta ferma il 95% del tempo in parcheggio e occupa circa l'83% della superficie pubblica. Questo è un dato italiano. Una roba che sta ferma il 95% del tempo. È una follia se ci pensate in termini produttivi, no? Ora, se noi usiamo l'auto condivisa abbiamo bisogno di molte meno auto, molti meno parcheggi, si libera spazio in città, questo succederà con le auto a guida autonoma, ma questo innesca anche dei fatti sociali, cioè quella roba che nasce per delle ragioni di ottimizzazione, ingegneristiche se volete, o ambientali, diventa un fatto sociale. Pensate a quanti amori nasceranno o finiranno su quelle auto che prenderemo in condivisione, che incontreremo delle persone che altrimenti non avremmo mai incontrato. Qui mi fermo, però mi sembra interessante perché questo concetto mi ha molto colpito quando mi hanno parlato di cosa fa FM, questo concetto di non progettare degli spazi ma dei luoghi. Ecco, l'auto condivisa diventa da spazio, dove stavamo, da non luogo, come avrebbe detto qualcuno, diventa invece un luogo dove abbiamo anche delle relazioni. E mi sembra che questo sia un po' anche l'intento di tutto questo progetto. Adesso io mi taccio, non ho intenzione di straparlare così tanto, vi presento gli ospiti a partire dallo special guest di oggi, che è Rex Miller. Ho guardato con curiosità di che cosa si è occupato. Credo di poter usare la parola guru, forse un po' abusata, ma nel suo caso mi pare che effettivamente sia l'esperienza corretta. Lui si occupa, diciamo, c'è uno slogan che campeggia sul sito della sua, diciamo, della sua attività, è Great Teams don't happen by accident. Insomma, i grandi team non accadono per caso. Questo è il centro del suo lavoro, ma lui ha lavorato molto anche su come gli spazi impattano sugli aspetti, sulla qualità del lavoro, ma anche sugli aspetti organizzativi, su quello che accade dentro le aziende. Se voi cambiate lo spazio, cambiano. Qualcuno ha detto che se volete cambiare i comportamenti, cambiate gli strumenti, no? Ma anche cambiare gli spazi. Io qua ho un bicchiere, berrò acqua di rubinetto perché non sono in un convegno, sono a casa mia, altrimenti sarebbe l'acqua di una bottiglietta di plastica. Cioè, come dire, questo per fare un esempio banale. E quindi lui ci introdurrà con un intervento di una ventina di minuti, come dire, sarà molto interessante proprio a proposito appunto di come disegnare gli spazi, disegnare la qualità e la salubrità, direi, degli spazi sia fondamentale proprio per come dire, per avere anche degli effetti sull'organizzazione aziendale desiderati. Poi avremo tre interventi, quello di Simonetta Biarlori, che è Chief People, Organization and Transformation Officer di Leonardo, industria che tutti conosciamo, Roberto Battaglia, capo delle risorse umane corporate e investment banking di Intesa San Paolo, e poi avremo Paolo Gencarelli, che è Head of Group Real Estate di Poste Italiane, che ci porteranno la loro esperienza su questo tema del rapporto tra spazi e lasciatemi dire tra spazi e sviluppo professionale, umano e organizzativo. E poi avremo, come sappiamo, tutta una serie di invece di interventi di tutti coloro che ci stanno seguendo in questo momento con testimonianze. Bene, passo finalmente la parola a Rex Miller per il suo intervento introduttivo.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. And I'm very impressed with all of the preparation that's gone behind this. It's a lot different than doing a live event, and it takes a lot of coordination. So I really appreciate both the invitation and the opportunity to talk on 3 questions that I was given. And the first question is about what's the new office about? What's the meaning of the new workplace post-pandemic? The second question is, why does employee care, or why is their well-being now an important priority? And then the third question is, what's the relationship between technology and the future in terms of improving performance, behavior, and well-being? So I will provide an overview and a framework, hopefully to provoke some conversation around these. And I'll start with the first one. What is the meaning of the new office? And I'll frame it in 5 words. The first one is culture. The second word is convinced. The third is continuity. The fourth is care. And the fifth is community. So let me talk about culture. The physical environment is an embodiment of culture. And when I talk about culture, it really is an expression of what's important to us. It tells us who's important. It tells us what we do here. It expresses why we do it. And what we have to come to grips with is that the culture we had before the pandemic is completely different. The culture consists of the invisible attitudes, values, behaviors, and habits that actually run the place when we're not there. I like to use the phrase that culture is what happens when we're not there in terms of the leadership. Now, the reason the culture shifted is that the people that we had before the pandemic, they're different people now, and different things are important to them. There's nobody I have spoken to who says they want to go back to the way they did work before. Now, many people are expressing they'd like to get back to the office, but they want to get off the treadmill, the drive. And now we have to rethink the workplace, beginning from the inside out, beginning with culture, and then considering what's new and what's important to us. One good example is a client I work with in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, a high-tech firm, global high-tech firm. They once had a value that our best work is in the office. They did not permit work from home prior to the pandemic. That was a value. It was a deeply embedded value. Now, all of that has to be rethought and re-expressed in the workplace. And if people come back and see an environment that's similar to the one they left, then that's going to trigger some insecurities and concerns about being productive in this new environment. The second C is convinced. We have proven that we can be effective working from anywhere. And so in order to re-attract people back into the workplace, they have to be convinced that they will be more productive, that they will be better at their work, that they will be happier and healthier. So that's a challenge we're going to have to address. And as I'm working with companies that are beginning the return to office effort, they're finding resistance because people are questioning, why do I need to come in? Because I've spent a year working effectively outside the office. So that's a high bar that we have to address. The third C, continuity, is we need to plan for the disruption of the start and stop. Right now in Europe, in many areas, there is a form of lockdown or restrictions. India is going through another phase. We can expect this, according to an economist from the University of Southern California, Nick Vaez. He's a supply chain expert, and he says because of the interlinking of our economies, we're going to see 7 years of this kind of start-stop disruption, hotspots, responding, reacting. That not only has a business continuity challenge, but it also has a strong mental health issue of individuals trying to cope with, am I coming into the office or not? Will I be safe or not? How do I manage my world at home? And so that's a big challenge to begin to look at, that the office is not just your physical office, but we now need to have to consider home as another place of work and equip it properly and accommodate people who are working from that remote location. The care side of things, one of the new elements, we have gone through a mass disaster. One clinical psychologist compares this to wartime conditions in terms of the psychological impact. There are different cycles of psychological impact coming out of a mass disaster. Prior to the pandemic, it was estimated that in the United States, about 8% of the work population had some form of post-traumatic stress. Now the numbers are estimated in the 40% range. This is uncharted territories. Few companies that I talk to understand the implications of this, understand the long-term ripple effect. So mental health, mental well-being, brain health has to become a new part of our disciplines, habits, support, and understanding what kinds of behaviors are likely to happen when people get stressed and get triggered. The fifth one, community, is re-examining the workplace. Many of the work environments that I work in are still designed and structured based on reporting authority or departments. They're silos. So everybody in accounting works in accounting. Everybody in sales works in sales. Now, we need to move from what was considered an efficient designed work model to one that's more similar to how work actually gets done, designed around relationships, communication networks, and workflow. So this new kind of work environment, we need to look at, one, to remove some of the stressors that are in the workplace. A second question is the care side of things. A lot of companies have had wellness programs, and the research we did that resulted in the book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, proved to us that wellness programs have been ineffective. They've been ineffective for the last 40 years. They cannot work in terms of improving health outcomes and reducing costs. They've proven to fail in all those areas. And what we found is that the alarming statistic that we need to address is the rise of chronic disease. In the United States, 6 out of 10 adults, 60% of adults have at least one form of chronic disease. 40% have 2. So they have complex chronic disease. Now, what does that mean to you? Well, to us in the United States, treating chronic disease consumes 80% of all the health costs that we spend. So imagine that, 80% chronic disease. And chronic disease is typically considered, in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, to be a lifestyle disease driven by smoking, alcohol, overuse of alcohol or drugs, consuming what we call in the United States comfort food, high calorie, carbohydrate, sugared food, processed food, and watching television or what we call sedentary lifestyle. Those are the primary drivers that turn into what's called metabolic syndrome, which then leads to chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes. Now, we've traced those. The villain of all that unhealthy behavior is stress. So that's the root cause. So unless we get to the root cause, and the number one cause of stress, I'll let you guess, it's the workplace. 78% of employees report in a Harvard study that work is the number one cause of either high stress or very high stress. Now, here's the connection to the pandemic. When we tracked that, the rise of chronic disease was elevating at a 7% compounded rate a year. Now, if it's driving the major cost, that means that that rise of 7% will double in about 10 years. And that means the cost of healthcare is going to nearly double in 10 years. When we talk to most CEOs and CFOs and companies, what they're paying in health costs, at least in the United States, is about $12,500 per employee. Employees with families pay about $6,000. So imagine that doubling over 10 years, and imagine what it's doing to profits. So companies are going to be forced to either push that cost down to their employees, or they're going to be constrained and go out of business. Now, here's the connection to the pandemic. The majority of deaths, over 80% of deaths from the pandemic, are with patients that had some form of either obesity or chronic disease. Now, a high percentage of that, of course, are with people over 65 years of age. That's my age category. So there's a high correlation between lifestyle and chronic disease and age. But now we start seeing that from a strategic standpoint, if we do not build workforce resiliency, we will continue to be at risk. Now, there's many factors outside of work that contribute, and things that companies can't control, but to the level that they can control and improve the health, reduce the stress of their workplace. And when we explored is one of the best ways to do it is to build and create a healthy environment. So those who are familiar with the International Well Building Institute, that has proven to be able to provide positive health benefits, the air you breathe, the lighting, your circadian rhythm, your hormone balance. There's requirements around the food you eat, movement in the workplace, and they're moving more and more to include mental health sides of that as well. That touches 100% of your employees compared to wellness programs that are touching maybe 10% of your employees at best. That is your lowest cost, most effective way to improve the health outcomes. Another approach from a design standpoint are looking at things called legible design. Now, Dr. Mike O'Neill, who has a company called Human Scale, has written about the 5 elements of legible design that make design intuitive, human-centered. So those are important elements that you can include that help make it more easier to flow through the workplace and reducing stress. Another area too is to apply what many high-end hospitality companies apply, which is looking at the employee's journey points. These are called touch points, and measuring those touch points is either friction points. So if they come to the check-in desk or the lobby, is that a friction point, stressful? Is it a neutral point? Or is it a delight point? So you can map all these touch points and from a design standpoint, begin to change that encounter and that interaction with it. And then the third element is what we call voice and choice, giving people a voice into how they work best and accommodating that, and choice in terms of where they work and how they do their work. In the United States, we call that activity workplace design as one of the strategies for doing that. Now, the final element is technology and behavior. Technology has always been a driver of change, not only in work, but the workplace. At the turn of the 20th century, we found the factory model was a key driver in how we organized work in an assembly model mode. A lot of us started work and the work was still in that mode. When I went to work, we had memo sheets and we had these envelopes that passed through the office and each person had to check it off one after another, as though it were an assembly line. And then these little things called computers started showing up in the office. So in the 1950s, the office changed in the United States after World War II because of prosperity, because of the highway system, and because of television and seeing products and goods. So now we had to create what was called the service economy. And that was a major growth. So that changed the factory, started moving into workplace to manage all the flow and the services of goods. 1964, Gordon Moore and Intel created the microchip, and we came up with what was called Moore's Law, that the computing power of a microchip would double every 18 to 24 months at equal or lower cost. What that meant is we went from a linear culture of change, predictable, very predictable change. In fact, when I first went to work, we did 5-year plans and 10-year plans. I'm not sure I can even plan 90 days from now these days. So that logarithmic exponential growth created what was called the information economy. So we went from the service economy to the information economy. And in 1968, Robert Probst, who was working for Herman Miller, wrote the book, A Facility Based on Change. That was the new driver of the workplace. And so we moved into an environment that had cubicles to adapt to change. Then in the late 90s, there was something called Y2K, where all the computers were going to shut off because of their code structure in the year 2000. But what that did is it spurred a revolution because every company had to upgrade their computing technology, and it drove the technology boom in the early 2000s in the internet boom. Then in 2000, the iPhone created what we now experience, the work from anywhere capability, the mobility and the social nature of connectedness. What we're doing today is an offspring of that iPhone experience and the ability to work from anywhere. Now we have the pandemic. So what the pandemic is going to drive us to is, for the next 10 years, we will see a rapid acceleration of work from anywhere capabilities. We've dipped our toe in it. Now we have to look at a work from anywhere world where we can work from a coffee shop or from a home or from a university. It's going to change the nature of the employee. It's going to change the workflow that we have. And one of the two key technology things that we see that are going to drive work are health technology, monitoring and tracking strain and stress. You can see I've got one band here. We do a lot of health metrics. Daniele's got one as well. I've also got the Aura Ring, and I've got the BioStrap. One of the things we're measuring is the strain and load of doing virtual sessions. And the brain load, the brain consumes 20% of your calories, 20 to 30% normally. It's the largest calorie consuming organ in your body. But when we're doing virtual sessions, it's 50%. So what we've been measuring is that by 3 p.m. in the afternoon, a lot of people feel absolutely wiped out and drained. I've been measuring my calories. I'm a certified tennis professional, so I track my strain levels. When I do this, when I've done a 4-hour session, I've burned more than 4,500 calories. The Aura Ring converts that into walking distance. It's clocked in at over 29 miles of walking. So if I'm working from home and I'm doing 8 hours of normal work, 6 hours of virtual work, that's the equivalent of a 14-hour day that I've put in terms of the strain, the stress, the cortisol in my body. So we feel that health tracking and health metrics are going to become a technology that companies are going to use to help for safety reasons, for health reasons, and we have to get control of the cost. The other area, as I said, is the technology that's going to support work from anywhere. We're in a new period of time. The work that we're doing, I'm working in partnership with a clinical psychologist from the Hidden Value Group. What we're finding is the big missing component in our industry as we plan for returning to the office, and we're thinking about how do we shift workplace, how do we improve culture. The big missing piece to the equation is mental well-being. How do we support that? How do we look at brain health and bring that in? We feel that that has to become a new strategic imperative for companies. And so that's the primary effort and work we've been working on for the last year because we see the gap in that area. So those are the three areas. The new purpose of the office, we have to design it around how people work and workflow, and we have to create a value proposition where people can't want to come into the office because they know they're going to be more productive, they're going to be better at their work, they're going to be happier and healthier. We need to look at the taking care of employees because of the vulnerability and the risk companies have with the health that they're currently experiencing. The health costs will continue to rise. It's unsustainable from a corporate standpoint. And then the final piece is that the pandemic has released what happens with disruption is it typically accelerates technologies that have been held back because of old norms, structures. And the old norm, you have to come in the office. The old norm of command and control reporting has been busted by the pandemic. And now the companies that best adapt to this new work from anywhere mode and learning how to create a virtual culture that keeps cohesion, they're going to be the winners in the future. So I'm going to turn this over to some Q&A. I hope this stimulated some questions and gave you some insights.